Every month, for almost 14 years, my husband sent money to his sick sister. I never suspected anything until the day I met her in person. What I discovered that day changed my life forever. Good morning, dear viewers. My name is Teresa. I'm 76 years old, and today I'm sharing a story from my life that I've kept secret for a long time. Before I begin, if you're watching now, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It helps me continue sharing my stories with you all. Let's go back to 1965. I was only 16 when I met Arnold. He was a handsome, hard-working young man with a promising future as a truck driver. Back then, being a trucker was a respected job, you know? The pay was good. And I, a simple girl from the suburbs of Chicago, daughter of farmers who moved to the city looking for a better life, saw in him a chance to build a family. We got married after 6 months of dating. My mother said it was too fast, that I barely knew the guy, but that's how things were back then. You fell in love and got married quickly. It wasn't like today where couples live together first to see if it works out. Back then, we got married in church with a veil and gown, asking for God's blessing for the marriage to last forever. Our beginning was difficult, as it was for most young couples. We lived in a small bedroom and kitchen in the back of his aunt's house. Arnold traveled a lot, driving the Chicago-Indianapolis-New York route. Sometimes he'd be gone 3-4 days. I understood. It was his job. He always said, "Teresa, it's for you and the family we're going to build that I drive across this country." Soon, our first child, Charles Edward, was born. 2 years later, Mary Elizabeth arrived, and 3 years after that, Joseph Andrew. 3 children to raise, and there I was, juggling between diapers, bottles, and housekeeping while Arnold continued on the road. It was around our 2nd year of marriage that he told me about his sister, Celia. According to Arnold, she lived in Indianapolis and had health problems. He never specified exactly what the illness was, just said it was serious and that she needed constant help. Every month, without fail, he would set aside a good portion of his salary to send to her. "Teresa, she's my only sister. Our parents are gone. We only have each other. I can't abandon her," he would tell me with those brown eyes that convinced me of everything. And I, naive as I was, believed him. I even thought it was beautiful, that brotherly love, that concern. Many times, when money was tight at home, when we couldn't afford school supplies for the kids, or when Charles Edward's sneakers were worn through, I would look at the envelope Arnold set aside for Celia and feel a pang in my heart. But I never, ever questioned it. It was his family. I respected that. The years went by. Our life remained simple but stable. We lived in a small 2-story house in the suburbs. The children attended public school. I took in laundry to help with expenses, but we didn't go hungry. Arnold earned reasonably well as a truck driver, even though a considerable part of his salary went to this Celia. Something I found strange, but didn't question much, was the fact that we never visited this sister-in-law. During holidays, birthdays, there was never an invitation to meet her. When I suggested it, Arnold always changed the subject. He said she was very private, didn't like visitors, that her home environment needed to be controlled because of her illness. "One day we will, Teresa, but now's not a good time," he always answered. And I, raised to be a good wife, not to question my husband's decisions, accepted it. Today I wonder how I could have been so blind, so naive. But in those days, that's how it was. Women accepted, stayed quiet, trusted. The routine was always the same. Arnold would leave for his trips, come home for a few days, and leave again. When he said he was going to New York, the trips lasted longer, usually a whole week. "It's farther away, Teresa, and the New York loads always pay more," he explained. And it made sense to me. It was in 1978, when we had been married for 13 years, that things began to change. Our children were growing up. Charles Edward was 12, Mary Elizabeth was 10, and Joseph Andrew was 7. I had managed to get a job as a sewing assistant in a small clothing factory near our home. I didn't earn much, but it helped with expenses. And I liked the work. I always had a knack for sewing, learned it from my mother since I was little. That March of 1978, I remember it like it was yesterday, I was arranging Arnold's things for another trip to New York. As I always did, I washed and ironed his shirts, sorted his socks, checked if any buttons were missing from his uniform. It was a routine I had faithfully followed for years. I picked up his coat, that navy blue coat he always wore on trips, to check if it needed any repairs. That's when I felt something in the inside pocket. I put my hand in and pulled out a homemade birthday card, decorated with colorful dots. I opened the card and read, "Happy birthday, my love. May God give you many years of life and health to continue being the wonderful father and husband you are. With all our love, Celia and Deborah." My heart raced. I read those words over and over, trying to find some explanation. Father? Husband? Who was Deborah? Why was his supposedly sick sister calling him my love and husband? Arnold's birthday had been in February, a month earlier. I had made a simple cake, bought a small gift, a new wallet since his was very worn. He barely ate the cake, said he was tired from the trip, and thanked me for the gift without much enthusiasm. Now I understood why that cold reaction. He had probably already celebrated with them, whoever they were. I put the card in my apron pocket with trembling hands. I didn't confront Arnold at that moment. Something inside me said I needed more proof, needed to better understand what was happening before making any accusations. Arnold left for another trip to New York the next day, not suspecting that I had found the card. He kissed me on the forehead, as he always did, hugged the children, and promised to bring a chocolate bar for each one when he returned. The scene was so familiar, so normal, but now there was a shadow over it, a doubt growing inside me. In the days that followed, I was alert to any detail, any clue that might help me understand what was happening. I didn't mention it to anyone, not even my best friend Louise, who lived next door. It was a pain, a suspicion that I kept just for myself. It was on Thursday of that week that I received a phone call that would change everything. The phone rang around 3 in the afternoon. Back then, having a telephone was rare in homes. We had managed to install one a few months earlier, and it was a source of pride in the neighborhood. "Hello? Good afternoon. This is Star Road Trucking Company. Could I speak with Mr. Arnold?" "He's not here. He's traveling. I'm his wife, Teresa." "Mrs. Teresa, we need to speak with him urgently. We have a load for New York that needs to leave today. The driver who was supposed to take it had a problem, and we thought of Arnold." "But he's already in New York," I said, confused. "He left Monday morning and should be returning soon." There was silence on the other end of the line. "In New York? Impossible, ma'am. The load he was supposed to take only got ready last night. He didn't leave for New York this week." I felt as if the ground was opening beneath my feet. My voice trembled as I responded. "There must be some mistake. My husband left for New York on Monday. He's worked for you for over 15 years. "Ma'am, we know. That's precisely why we're calling him. But he didn't pick up any load for New York this week. Perhaps you're confused." I hung up the phone with a trembling hand. No, I wasn't confused. Arnold told me clearly he was going to New York. He kissed me on the forehead, hugged the children, and left with his travel bag. Where had he gone? The doubt grew inside me like a tumor. That same week, while looking for the children's documents for school re-enrollment, I opened the drawer where Arnold kept his papers. At the bottom of the drawer, hidden under various documents, I found a checkbook from a different bank than ours and an envelope with Celia's name and an address in Indianapolis. I wrote the address on a piece of paper and kept it behind the photo in our wedding portrait. The irony didn't escape me, hiding the evidence of my husband's possible betrayal alongside the memory of the day we vowed fidelity to each other before God. The days that followed were filled with anguish. I needed to know the truth, but I was afraid of what I might discover. What if Arnold had another family? What if that Deborah mentioned in the card was his daughter? How would I face this reality with 3 children to raise and very little professional experience? But I've always been a woman of courage, even when I seemed fragile on the outside. I decided I would go to Indianapolis, to that address, to discover who Celia really was and what she meant in my husband's life. I waited until Arnold's next trip to New York, which happened 2 weeks later. On Friday, as soon as he left, I took the children to my friend Louise's house. I need to take care of some business in Indianapolis, I told her, without going into details. I'll be back tomorrow night. Could you watch the children? Louise, always helpful, accepted without asking too many questions. She must have noticed something strange in my behavior over the past few days, but respected my silence. I took my savings, money I kept hidden in the hot chocolate tin at the back of the kitchen cabinet. It wasn't much, but it would cover the round-trip bus fare to Indianapolis and leave some for emergencies. I put the birthday card in my purse. It was the only concrete proof I had. I wore my best dress, a light blue one with small flowers that I had sewn myself. I combed my hair neatly and applied subtle lipstick. I wanted to look presentable to face whatever I might find at that address in Indianapolis. I caught the bus at the station early in the morning. The trip to Indianapolis took about 3 hours, but to me, it seemed like an eternity. My heart was beating so hard that I felt the other passengers could hear it. What would I find? Was I about to discover that my entire married life had been a lie? Or would there be a reasonable explanation for all this, and I would return home relieved, laughing at my fertile imagination? When I got off the bus in Indianapolis, I took another city bus that would take me to the neighborhood indicated in the address. It was a nice neighborhood, clearly more affluent than mine. The houses were larger, the gardens well kept, the streets cleaner. I finally reached the address. It was a corner house painted in light yellow with a beautiful garden in front and a small shop in the garage. A discreet sign announced, "Celia's Atelier, Custom Clothing." I took a deep breath and opened the gate. The sound of the doorbell made my heart jump. I was about to discover the truth that would change my life forever. I entered the small atelier, trying to control the trembling of my hands. The shop was beautiful, well organized, with various clothing items displayed on racks and mannequins. Colorful fabrics were arranged on shelves, much more luxurious than the scraps I sewed with at home. It was a welcoming, feminine environment that, under different circumstances, I would have admired. But at that moment, each detail only increased my anguish. A young girl appeared from the back of the shop. She must have been about 14, with long brown hair tied in a braid and eyes. My God, those eyes were identical to my Charles Edward's, identical to Arnold's. "Good morning, ma'am. Can I help you?" she asked with a friendly smile. I stood paralyzed for a few seconds, observing every detail of that young face. The shape of her nose, the slightly square chin, even the way she smiled, with her head slightly tilted to the side. Everything reminded me of Arnold. "I'm looking for Celia," I managed to say, my voice barely coming out. "My mom went out to buy materials, but my dad is home. Would you like to speak with him?" My dad. Those two simple words confirmed what my heart already knew. Deborah. She was the girl from the birthday card, my husband's daughter with another woman. "Yes, please," I replied automatically, though I wasn't prepared for what would follow. "Dad, there's a customer here looking for you," she shouted toward the back of the house. The seconds that followed seemed like an eternity. I heard footsteps approaching, and then there, standing in the doorway that separated the shop from the residence, was Arnold, my husband, the man who at that very moment should have been driving a truck to New York. Our eyes met, and I saw his face lose all color. His eyes widened in pure terror. For an instant, it seemed as if he had seen a ghost. And perhaps, in a way, that's exactly what it was. The ghost of the life he had built with lies, finally coming to collect its debts. "Teresa," he murmured, so softly I almost didn't hear. The girl looked confused from one to the other. "You know each other?" Before either of us could answer, a woman entered through the front door carrying bags. She was a pretty woman about my age, well-groomed hair, red lipstick, wearing an elegant dress that certainly cost more than all my clothes put together. "I'm back, honey. I found that fabric Mrs. Wilson wanted for the wedding dress." She stopped when she saw me. I'm sorry. I didn't know we had a customer. Celia, Arnold said, his voice choked. This is Teresa. She looked at me without understanding at first. Then slowly, her face changed. First confusion, then surprise, and finally the same expression of horror I had seen on Arnold's face. Teresa, you're... She didn't complete the sentence, but she didn't need to. She knew who I was. I took the card from my purse with trembling hands and held it up. I found this in his coat. Celia dropped the bags on the floor. Deborah looked at all of us, confused, trying to understand what was happening. Mom, Dad, who is she? Deborah, sweetie, go to your room, Celia asked, but the girl didn't move. No, she has the right to know, I said, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. After all, she's also a victim in this story. I turned to the young girl, whose eyes were now filled with fear and confusion. My name is Teresa. I've been married to your father for 13 years. We have 3 children together. The girl's face contorted in shock. She looked at her father, then at her mother, searching for some denial, some sign that what I was saying was a lie. But their silence confirmed everything. It's not true, is it, Dad? She begged, tears beginning to stream down her face. Tell me it's not true. Arnold seemed to have aged 10 years in those few minutes. He ran his hand over his face, a gesture I knew so well. He always did it when he was cornered. Deborah, I can explain. Explain what? Celia interrupted, her voice trembling with anger. That you have another family? That everything you've told us all these years was a lie? I sat down in a nearby chair. My legs could no longer support me. The shop that minutes before had seemed so cozy now suffocated me. I looked around and noticed the photographs on the wall. Arnold embracing Celia and Deborah, smiling in outings, birthdays, family moments that were stolen from me and my children. How long? I asked, looking directly at Arnold. Since when have you been maintaining this double life? He lowered his head, unable to face me. I met Celia in 1963, before you, Teresa. When Celia got pregnant in 1964, I was already dating you. I didn't know what to do. So you decided to marry me and maintain 2 families? My voice came out louder than I intended. For 14 years, Arnold, 14 years of lies. Celia approached me, her eyes now filled with tears. He told me he was a widower when Deborah was born, that he couldn't officially marry me because of his first wife's pension. I believed him, Teresa. Deborah, leaning against the wall, sobbed quietly. My heart ached for her. That innocent girl, born amid so many lies. And the money? I asked, turning again to Arnold. The money you said you sent to your sick sister every month? He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. It was obvious. The money that could have given my children a better life, that could have paid for courses, new clothes, dental treatment for Mary Elizabeth, was being used to maintain this other family, this beautiful house, this shop. Do you have children? Celia suddenly asked, drying her tears with the back of her hand, smudging the red lipstick. 3, I answered. Charles Edward, 12, Mary Elizabeth, 10, and Joseph Andrew, 7. And... I hesitated for a moment, my hand instinctively going to my belly. I just found out I'm expecting our 4th. Arnold raised his head abruptly upon hearing this, the shock evident on his face. He didn't know. I had only confirmed it the week before, but with all this situation, I hadn't found the right moment to tell him. What irony of fate. Pregnant? He murmured, his face as pale as paper. Yes, Arnold. We're having another child you will abandon half the time to live your other life. Celia sat down too, looking as destroyed as I felt. How could you, Arnold? How could you do this to us? To Deborah? To her children? She pointed at me, her voice choked with tears. We were 2 families waiting for you, believing in you, loving you. Arnold looked like a cornered animal. He looked from one to the other, searching for words that wouldn't come. Finally, he said the only thing he probably thought could save him. I love you both. I love both families. Please, try to understand. I didn't want to hurt anyone. Anger rose inside me like a wave. Didn't want to hurt anyone? And what are you doing now? Arnold, what have you done all these years? Every time you left home saying you were going to work to give us a better life, you were coming here. Every time you said you were in New York, you were here with them. Every penny that could have gone to our children's education, to improving our house, to giving them what we didn't have, you spent here. I looked around the house, much more comfortable than the small 2-story house where I raised my children. Look at this place, Arnold. Look at the difference. While I took in laundry to supplement our income, you set up this shop for her. Celia seemed to realize something for the first time. You said you took in laundry. Arnold told me you were a teacher, that you had a good salary, that you didn't need financial help. I laughed bitterly. Teacher? I barely finished elementary school, Celia. I work as a sewing assistant in a clothing factory and do laundry in my spare time. We live in a small 2-story house in the suburbs of Chicago. Our children have never had an expensive toy, never taken a vacation. Turning to Arnold, I continued, That's why you always resisted when I suggested we save for the children's education. That's why you always changed the subject when I talked about renovating the house. The money already had a set destination, didn't it? Deborah, who had been quiet for a while, suddenly spoke, her voice broken by sobs. I have siblings? I have siblings and never knew it. The question, so innocent and at the same time so filled with pain, broke something inside me. I approached her slowly, like someone approaching a frightened animal. Yes, Deborah, you have 3 siblings. Charles Edward looks a lot like you, has the same eyes. Mary Elizabeth is quiet like you seem to be. And Joseph Andrew is a handful, but he has a huge heart. They don't know about you, just as you didn't know about them. Tears flowed freely down the girl's face. And now? What happens now? It was the question that had been echoing in my mind since the moment I found the card. What would happen now? How would I continue my life knowing that everything I believed was a lie? Arnold, perhaps sensing he was losing control of the situation, tried to approach me. Teresa, let's talk. Let's resolve this. We don't need to make hasty decisions. I stepped back. Don't touch me. I don't want to hear any more lies. Celia, who had been silent, suddenly stood up. You slept at my house last night. You said you'd stay here until Sunday, that you'd only return to Chicago on Monday, that you'd take Deborah to the movies tomorrow. She turned to me, a new understanding in her eyes. When he was with you, he said he was traveling to New York, right? And when he was with me, he told you he was working. I nodded, feeling a strange connection with this woman who until minutes ago was just a name, a supposedly sick sister. He told you I was his sister? She asked incredulously. Yes, his sick sister who needed constant financial help. That's how he justified the money he sent every month. Celia shook her head, laughing without humor. And he told me he had a nephew with problems, son of a brother who lived upstate, that he was helping financially with the treatments. We looked at each other. 2 women deceived by the same man. 2 lives built on lies. At that moment, I felt closer to Celia than to the man with whom I had shared my bed for 13 years. Arnold began to speak again, trying to explain, trying to justify the unjustifiable, but his words were hollow, empty of meaning. He spoke of love, of not wanting to hurt anyone, of how things had gotten out of his control. As he spoke, a decision formed inside me. I didn't know how my life would be from now on, how I would raise 4 children alone, how I would face society as a separated woman in the 70s. But I knew with absolute certainty that I could not remain married to a man who had lived on lies for so long. Arnold, I interrupted his flow of excuses. I don't want to hear any more. I'm going to catch the bus back to Chicago now. When you return home, I want you to get your things and leave. I don't want you near me or my children. Teresa, please, let's talk. There's nothing to talk about. You destroyed our family. You lied to me, to our children, to them. I pointed to Celia and Deborah. There's no going back. I turned to leave, but looked one last time at Celia and Deborah before I did. "I'm sorry you went through this. You don't deserve it." I left the shop onto the sunny Indianapolis street, feeling strangely light, despite the pain tearing at my chest. The truth, as painful as it was liberating. On the bus back to Chicago, as tears silently rolled down my face, I began to plan the next steps. How would I tell my children? How would I survive financially? How would I rebuild my life from the broken pieces Arnold left behind? I didn't know what the future held for me, but I knew that day in Indianapolis had been the end of one life and the beginning of another. A life without lies, without betrayals. A life that, although uncertain, would be authentically mine. Going home that day was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. While the bus traveled from Indianapolis to Chicago, I looked out the window without really seeing the landscape. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. How would I tell the children? What would I say to the neighbors? How would we survive financially? When I got home, it was already night. I picked up my children from Louise's house, who immediately noticed something was wrong. My swollen eyes and the desolate expression on my face must have given me away. "Did something happen, Teresa?" she asked softly, while the children played in the living room. "We'll talk later," was all I could say. I took the children home and tried to act normally, but Charles Edward, always so observant, noticed I wasn't well. "Mom, are you sick?" he asked, his eyes, so similar to Deborah's I now knew, full of concern. "No, son, just a little tired from the trip," I replied, forcing a smile. I put the children to bed early that night, telling a story I could barely focus on remembering. When I finally closed the door to their room, I collapsed on the living room sofa and cried like I had never cried before. I cried for myself, for my children, even for Celia and Deborah. All victims of Arnold's web of lies. On Sunday, Arnold was supposed to return from his trip to New York. I spent the whole day mentally rehearsing what I would say to him, how I would demand he leave the house. But he didn't come that Sunday or Monday. On Tuesday, when the children were already asking insistently about their father, I received a call from the trucking company. Arnold had quit. He gave no explanations, just left a letter resigning from his position and never showed up again. That's when I understood that he wouldn't return, wouldn't have the courage to face what he had done. He would abandon me and the children, just as he had probably abandoned Celia and Deborah. The days that followed were pure desperation. The money we had saved was little. It would barely cover a month of expenses. My salary as a sewing assistant wouldn't be enough to support the house and 4 children. 3 already born and 1 on the way. It was at this moment that sewing, the skill I learned from my mother since I was little, became my lifeline. I began to accept small repair and alteration jobs for the neighborhood. I put ads in local markets. I offered my services at the school gate when picking up the children. At first, it was so little that it barely made a difference in the budget, but gradually, the clientele grew. People began to seek me out not just for repairs, but to make new clothes, curtains, tablecloths. My work was neat, and my prices were fair. Soon, the living room of our small house was transformed into an improvised atelier, with fabric scraps, threads, and an old sewing machine I had bought secondhand. Meanwhile, my belly grew, as did the curiosity of the neighborhood. In the 70s, a woman alone, pregnant, raising 3 children, was the target of many comments and looks of disapproval. I invented a story that Arnold had found a better job in another state and that we would soon move there. It was easier than explaining the truth, than exposing my children to the shame of having a father who led a double life. I clearly remember the day I received an unexpected call. It was Celia. "Teresa, this is Celia from Indianapolis." My heart raced. What did she want? Did she have news of Arnold? "Has Arnold returned there?" she asked, her voice tense. "No," I replied. "He hasn't come back. He quit the trucking company and disappeared." There was silence on the other end of the line, then a sigh. "Here, too. disappeared without a trace, left only a letter asking for forgiveness, saying he didn't deserve either of us. I can't explain what I felt at that moment. Anger, of course, for him abandoning the children, but also a strange relief at not having to face him, not having to hear more of his lies. "How are you?" Celia asked, surprising me with the genuine concern in her voice. "Surviving," I replied honestly. "And you and Deborah?" "Surviving too. The shop is supporting us at least." Another silence, then she continued. "Teresa, if you find out where he is, let me know. Not for me, but for Deborah. She needs answers." "Of course," I promised. "And if you learn anything, let me know too. My children also deserve to know." We hung up with a strange sense of camaraderie. We were two women abandoned by the same man, two mothers trying to protect their children from the pain of rejection. In August 1978, my youngest daughter, Beatrice, was born. The delivery was difficult, complicated by the stress and worries of the last few months. But when I held that little one in my arms, a new feeling of determination was born in me. I would raise those 4 children alone, with dignity, and would do everything so they would never lack the essentials. The months that followed were full of work and little rest. I sewed during the day while Beatrice slept, and at night after the children went to bed. The older ones helped as they could, Charles Edward making small deliveries of finished clothes, Mary Elizabeth caring for the baby while I worked, Joseph Andrew helping with household chores. In 1979, I filed for divorce. I didn't know where Arnold was, but his abandonment made the process easier. It was painful to have to explain everything to the lawyer, to see the story recorded in official documents, but I needed that divorce, needed that paper that said I was free, that I could rebuild my life. The neighborhood, of course, talked. At that time, being a divorced woman was almost a stigma. There were looks of pity, whispers when I passed. Some friends distanced themselves, as if divorce was contagious, but others, like Louise, remained by my side, offering support and friendship when I needed it most. It was around this time that I received a proposal that would change my life. Mrs. Wilson, a loyal customer for whom I did various sewing jobs, owned a small fabric store in the center of the neighborhood. One day, she appeared at my house with a proposal. "Teresa, I'm thinking of expanding my store. I want to open a dressmaking space, but I need someone who understands the business, who has good taste and skillful hands. I thought of you." The proposal was tempting, a fixed salary, better than at the factory where I worked as an assistant, and commission on pieces sold. I accepted immediately, seeing an opportunity to improve my children's lives. I worked hard at Mrs. Wilson's store during the day and continued with my extra work at night. Gradually, I began to create my own pieces, simple but elegant designs that pleased customers. Mrs. Wilson, noticing my talent, began to give me more creative freedom. In 1980, a year after starting at the store, I received another unexpected call from Celia. "Teresa, I need your help," she said. Her voice choked. She told me her shop was doing poorly, that debts were piling up, that she didn't know how to proceed. Arnold had never given any more news, and she and Deborah were about to lose their house. I don't know how to explain what motivated me. Maybe female solidarity, maybe the memory of Deborah's frightened look that day in Indianapolis, maybe the thought that it could have been me in her place. Without much reflection, I heard myself saying, "Come to Chicago. I know someone who needs a fabric salesperson." 2 weeks later, Celia and Deborah arrived in Chicago with few suitcases and many broken dreams. I rented a room for them in Louise's house, who, after hearing the whole story, agreed to help. I introduced Celia to Mrs. Wilson, who, impressed with her knowledge of fabrics and her way with customers, hired her immediately. Deborah, then 15, entered the same school as my children, though in different grades due to age. It was strange at first, this unlikely arrangement. My children, to whom I finally had to tell the truth about their father, were confused, hurt, especially Charles Edward, who at 13 already perfectly understood what his father had done. "Why are you helping them, Mom?" he asked me one day, his voice heavy with hurt. "He abandoned us because of them?" "No, son," I replied, holding his hands in mine. "Your father abandoned us because of himself, because of his own wrong choices. Celia and Deborah are victims just like us. And in this world, women need to help each other." Gradually, a strange friendship began to form between our families. Celia, who initially seemed uncomfortable with my generosity, began to reciprocate in the ways she could. She brought treats for the children, helped Mary Elizabeth with math lessons, a subject in which she excelled. She offered to look after Beatrice when I needed to work late. Deborah, after initial rejection, began to get closer to my children, especially Charles Edward. The two discovered that besides their appearance, they shared a love for books and stories. It was painful and at the same time comforting to see them together, discovering this late sibling bond. In 1981, Mrs. Wilson decided to retire and offered the store for sale. The price was beyond my means, but she, who had become almost a second mother to me, proposed a deal. I could pay in monthly installments while managing the business. That's when I had a bold idea. I called Celia for a talk. "What if we became partners?" I proposed. "You understand sales and fabrics. I understand dressmaking. Together we can transform this store into something bigger." She looked at me with surprise, then emotion. "You would trust me like that, Teresa?" "It wasn't you who lied to me, Celia. It was him who lied to us both." Thus was born New Beginning Clothing, a name that perfectly reflected our story. Celia took care of sales and administration. I handled creation and production. At first, it was just the two of us, working from dawn to dusk, but soon the business began to grow and we were able to hire assistants. The years passed and the store prospered. We moved to a larger space, hired more seamstresses, expanded the product line. We even began supplying uniforms to some local companies, including, ironically, the same trucking company where Arnold had worked. The children grew up. Charles Edward, always studious, earned a scholarship to college and graduated in engineering. Mary Elizabeth followed in my footsteps and became interested in fashion, becoming a talented designer who brought new ideas to the business. Joseph Andrew, with his communicative way, naturally took over the sales area when Celia began to reduce her pace due to age. And Beatrice, my youngest, born amid so much turbulence, grew to be a strong and determined young woman, studying law and defending causes for women like her mother. Deborah, Celia's daughter, graduated in business administration and brought a new level of professionalism to the business. It was she who suggested expanding into other areas, who organized our financial system, who guided us through complicated tax and labor laws. Life wasn't easy, but it was honest and dignified. We never heard from Arnold again. Years later, news came that he had died in a highway accident somewhere in the South. I felt a strange mixture of emotions: sadness for the father of my children, anger at the man who abandoned us, and finally, a kind of peace at having closure. When I look back at that frightened young woman who discovered her husband's betrayal in 1978, I barely recognize the woman I became. The path was hard, full of obstacles, but each challenge strengthened me. Each difficulty taught me something new. The birthday card I found in Arnold's coat pocket could have destroyed my life, but it ended up being the beginning of a journey of self-discovery and overcoming. The pain of betrayal transformed into strength to rebuild not just my life, but the lives of everyone around me. And the most surprising of all, the woman I most feared, the one who represented Arnold's betrayal, became my ally, my partner, my friend. Celia and I, two women deceived by the same man, found in each other the strength to move forward, proving that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as tragedies. The 80s brought many changes to America and to my life. While the country was experiencing the Reagan era and dreaming of prosperity, I was building my own path of liberation. Our store, New Beginning Clothing, grew each year, becoming a reference in the neighborhood. What began as a small business of two desperate women transformed into a solid company that employed more than 15 seamstresses and 3 salespeople. It wasn't easy. At first, many suppliers didn't take 2 divorced women trying to run a business seriously. I remember a fabric representative who insisted on speaking only to the owner when he came to the store. Celia, always more diplomatic than me, would smile and say, "You're speaking to her, actually, to both owners." In 1983, we expanded to a space 3 times larger on the main avenue of the neighborhood. We took out a bank loan, another immense challenge for women at that time. The manager only approved it after Charles Edward, then 18, signed as guarantor, even though all the assets were ours. That was the world we lived in, where a male signature was worth more than all the success history of a company run by women. But we didn't let these barriers stop us. The new store had a large window where we displayed our best creations. In the back, we set up a larger atelier with industrial machines that allowed us to accept bigger orders. Soon, we were supplying uniforms for schools, businesses, and even some hospitals in the region. Mary Elizabeth, my daughter, then 16, revealed herself to be a natural designer. She started drawing simple models for our younger clients, and soon her creations were among the most sought after in the store. Seeing her talent flourish was one of the greatest joys of those years. It was as if all the sacrifice, all the sleepless nights, all the hard work had been worth it just to see my children finding their own paths. Charles Edward entered engineering college in 1984 with a full scholarship for his exceptional academic performance. I remember the day of his graduation in 1989 as if it were yesterday. Sitting in the audience between Celia and my other children, I couldn't hold back tears when I saw him receiving his diploma, so elegant in his borrowed suit from a cousin. At that moment, I thought of Arnold, of how he had lost the privilege of seeing his son become such an admirable man. Joseph Andrew, always the most extroverted of my children, found his place in sales. Since adolescence, he helped in the store on Saturdays, charming customers with his natural charisma. When he turned 18 in 1989, he was already our main salesperson, with a special talent for negotiating with suppliers and winning new clients. And Beatrice, my youngest, born amid that storm of 1978, grew up as a strong and determined girl. From an early age, she showed a sharp intelligence and a sense of justice that often surprised me. When a teacher suggested that she should follow a career in cutting and sewing like her mother Beatrice, then only 10, replied that she wanted to be a lawyer to defend women like her mother, who had to fight against everything and everyone to survive. Deborah, Celia's daughter, graduated in business administration in 1986 and brought a new perspective to our business. With her knowledge, we implemented a more efficient financial control system, expanded into new product lines, and even opened a small branch in a neighboring area. She and Charles Edward worked together on company growth strategies, combining engineering and administration to optimize our processes. It was fascinating to see how the half-siblings who only met in adolescence developed such a close and collaborative relationship. Deborah and Charles Edward had the same analytical look, the same quiet determination. Mary Elizabeth and Deborah shared a refined aesthetic sense, though expressed in different ways, one in fashion, the other in the impeccable organization of spreadsheets and reports. I can't say everything was perfect. There were difficult moments, heated discussions, contested decisions, as in any family. And yes, we had become an unconventional family, united by bonds stronger than blood. There was the economic recession of the early 80s, the various economic plans that turned our planning upside down, the galloping inflation that made it almost impossible to price our products. In 1986, during an economic downturn, we almost lost everything. Frozen prices combined with scarcity of raw materials put us in an impossible position. I remember sleepless nights, sitting at the kitchen table with Celia and Deborah, trying to find a way out of the economic maze the country had gotten into. It was Charles Edward who suggested we diversify into repair and adjustment services that could be priced by hours of work and not just by the value of the final product. Joseph Andrew found a cotton producers cooperative in rural areas that accepted terms that allowed us to survive in the frozen market. And Mary Elizabeth created a line of accessories made with scraps that would have been discarded, transforming potential waste into a new source of income. Once again, adversity strengthened us instead of defeating us. We emerged from the economic crisis stronger, more diversified, and more united as a family and as a company. In 1990, when the country entered another recession, we faced another crisis. We had saved for years to buy a larger property for the store, and suddenly a large part of that money was inaccessible. There were months of hardship, reorganization, even more intense work. It was during this time that Celia began to show the first signs of fatigue. Older than me by a few years, she was already in her 50s, and the stress of previous years had taken its toll. It started with small things: frequent headaches, lack of appetite, fatigue that didn't pass with rest. In early 1991 came the diagnosis that devastated us: breast cancer, already at an advanced stage. Celia had ignored the signs, too busy taking care of the business, too busy ensuring Deborah's future. The months that followed were an emotional roller coaster. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. Good days followed by terrible days. Deborah, devastated by the possibility of losing her mother, found strength to continue managing the store while I accompanied Celia to treatments. It was strange how life came full circle. There I was, caring for the woman I once considered my rival, the other woman in my husband's life, holding her hand during chemotherapy sessions, helping her eat on days when she was too weak to lift a spoon, reading to her when her eyes were too tired to focus on the words. On one of those afternoons at the hospital, while waiting for the doctor, Celia held my hand and said something I'll never forget. "You know, Teresa, when you showed up at that shop in Indianapolis, I thought it was the worst day of my life, but today I see it was the best. That day freed me from a life of lies and brought me you, the best friend I've ever had." I couldn't respond, emotion closing my throat. I just squeezed her hand tightly, and she felt it, knowing that she understood everything I couldn't say. Celia fought bravely for 4 years. She had periods of remission when she returned to work part-time at the store, always with a colorful scarf covering her hairless head. She had relapses that took her back to the hospital for weeks. In 1995, on Deborah's 30th birthday, she left us peacefully in her bed, holding my hand on one side and her daughter's on the other. The grief was profound, not just for Deborah, but for all of us. Celia had become the heart of our strange, recomposed family. Her absence left a void that seemed impossible to fill. The store, though continuing to function under the competent administration of Deborah and my children, seemed less alive without her presence. It was during this period of mourning that I made a decision that surprised everyone. Using my savings and a loan that Charles Edward helped me get, I bought a larger house, with enough space for all of us, me, my 4 children, and Deborah, if she wanted to join us. I remember the expression on her face when I made the invitation, a mixture of surprise, emotion, and a touch of hesitation. "Are you sure, Teresa? Wouldn't it be strange for your children?" "My children have considered you family for years, Deborah, and so do I. Your mother was like a sister to me, and you are like a daughter. Our family has never been conventional anyway." She accepted. And so we began a new chapter. The new house, though not luxurious, was spacious and welcoming. Everyone had their own room, and there was still space for a sewing room where I continued creating, even if I spent less time at the store. Charles Edward got married in 1996 to Anna, a colleague from the engineering firm where he worked. The following year, my first grandchild, Gabriel, was born. Holding him in my arms for the first time was an indescribable experience. Looking at that perfect little face, I thought of all the journey that brought me there. The birthday card in Arnold's pocket, the discovery in Indianapolis, the years of struggle to rebuild my life, the unlikely friendship with Celia, the growth of the store, the crises overcome, each difficulty, each tear, each night of work until exhaustion. Everything had been worth it to reach that moment, to see my family growing, prosperous, united, in a way I never imagined possible. Mary Elizabeth graduated in fashion design in 1998 and completely took over the creative direction of the store. Her talent elevated our creations to a new level, attracting a more diverse clientele and expanding our reputation beyond the neighborhood. Joseph Andrew married young at 23 to his high school sweetheart and had 2 children in quick succession. Despite the early family responsibilities, he never stopped contributing to the business, becoming our commercial director and main person responsible for negotiations with suppliers and corporate clients. Beatrice, my youngest, completed law school in 1999, and although she opened her own office, always dedicated part of her time to taking care of the legal aspects of our company, ensuring everything was in compliance with labor and tax laws. And Deborah, who initially thought of building her career in a large company, decided to stay in the family business, assuming the role her mother had left and expanding it. Under her efficient administration, we opened 2 more branches by the end of the 90s, transforming the small clothing business born out of adversity into a respected network in local commerce. As the new millennium approached, I looked back and could hardly believe the transformation of my life, from the naive young woman who blindly believed in her husband to the respected businesswoman who had raised 4 children with dignity, from the betrayed and abandoned woman to the matriarch of an unconventional but extremely united family. The scars were still there, of course. There were moments when the memory of the betrayal still hurt, when Celia's absence still weighed, when the fatigue of years of struggle threatened to overcome me. But these scars had become marks of a battle won, silent witnesses of my ability to overcome, to reinvent myself, to transform pain into strength. As my mother used to say, God writes straight with crooked lines. What seemed to be the end of my world that Saturday in Indianapolis ended up being the beginning of a more authentic, fuller, and surprisingly happier life than I ever imagined possible. The new millennium arrived, bringing transformations to the world and profound reflections for me. At 76, looking back, I see a life I could never have imagined when I was that frightened young woman of 1978, discovering her husband's betrayal. The year 2000 was special for our family. We celebrated 20 years of New Beginning Clothing with a celebration that gathered old and new employees, loyal customers, suppliers who had become friends, and of course, all our unconventional family. I remember being on the small improvised stage, looking at that room full of smiling faces and feeling a wave of gratitude so intense I could barely speak. Deborah was by my side, holding my hand as if she sensed my emotion. The daughter life gave me, not by blood, but by a destiny that transformed tragedy into blessing. At that moment, I felt Celia's presence, as if she were there, smiling with that warm smile she maintained even in the most difficult days of her illness. We started as 2 broken women, I finally managed to say, with children to raise and broken hearts. We had little beyond our hands, our determination, and a skill with needle and thread. Look at us now. Tears flowed freely down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were of recognition for the path traveled, for lives transformed, for the legacy we were building. The business continued to prosper in the following years. In 2002, we expanded into the corporate uniform sector, a more stable market that protected us from economic fluctuations. In 2005, under Mary Elizabeth's leadership, we launched our first affordable party fashion collection, which became a huge success among women who wanted elegance without spending fortunes. But more than commercial success, what filled me with pride was seeing how each of my children, including Deborah in that count, had become an upright, compassionate, and determined adult. Charles Edward, my firstborn, became a respected engineer, working on projects that improved the lives of underprivileged communities. In 2003, he led an initiative to bring solar energy to a settlement on the outskirts of the city. When asked where his passion for social projects came from, he replied, "I learned from my mother that difficulties can be springboards, not obstacles." Mary Elizabeth transformed her fashion talent into a platform to empower other women. Besides her functions in the company, in 2006, she created a project that taught sewing to women in vulnerable situations, many of them victims of domestic violence. "My mother rebuilt her life with a needle and thread," she would tell her students. "You can too." Joseph Andrew, always the most communicative, became the public face of our business. It was he who negotiated our first major international partnership in 2008 with a European brand seeking ethical production in the United States. His natural charisma opened doors, but it was his integrity that kept those doors open. "I learned from my mother that your word is your most valuable asset," he used to say. Beatrice, my youngest, born amid the storm, became a lawyer dedicated to women's causes. In 2004, she opened a firm specializing in family law, helping women in situations similar to the one I faced decades earlier. "I grew up watching my mother fight against a system that wasn't prepared for a divorced woman with 4 children," she explained. "I want to ensure that other women have the legal support she didn't have." And Deborah, who grew up with the weight of being the daughter of the secret, transformed into a visionary businesswoman and dedicated philanthropist. In 2007, she established a foundation in her mother's name, Celia, which offered scholarships to children of single mothers. "My mother and Teresa taught me that family isn't defined by blood or papers," she would say at scholarship ceremonies. "It's defined by love, by care, by presence in difficult moments." Grandchildren started arriving, filling my house and my heart. By 2010, there were 8, 4 from Charles Edward, 2 from Joseph Andrew, 1 from Mary Elizabeth, and 1 from Beatrice. Seeing them grow, playing together on family Sundays, with no idea of the extraordinary circumstances that united their families, was one of my greatest joys. In 2012, at 63, I decided to reduce my active participation in the company. My children and Deborah were already running it competently, and I felt the need for more time for myself, to take care of my health, which was beginning to show signs of wear, and to enjoy my grandchildren. It wasn't a complete retirement. I still went to the store a few times a week, still created special pieces for old customers, still participated in important decisions, but now I had time for small joys, teaching grandchildren to sew, cultivating a small herb garden on the porch, participating in a reading group at the neighborhood library. It was in this calmer phase that I began to reflect deeply on my journey and the legacy I would leave. Not just the material legacy, the company, the house, the savings that ensured comfort for my children and grandchildren, but the legacy of values, of lessons learned, of wisdom gained through pain and overcoming. In 2015, I was invited to give a talk at an event for women entrepreneurs. I was nervous. I was never one for public speaking, always preferring the quiet work of my hands creating on fabric. But Beatrice insisted, saying my story could inspire other women. "I'm no speaker," I argued, "and I don't have the education to talk to a bunch of college graduates." "Mom," Beatrice replied with that determination she inherited from me, "you have something more valuable than any diploma, lived experience. Your story is powerful." I ended up accepting, and to my surprise, that talk opened a new phase in my life. Other women, many much younger than me, wanted to hear about how I transformed betrayal into strength, how I built a business from scratch, how I raised 4 children alone at a time when being a single mother was almost a scandal. "The secret," I would tell them, "isn't not falling. It's getting up every time life knocks you down, and if possible, getting up while bringing someone else who's also fallen." In 2018, at 69, I experienced another milestone, the merger of our company with a national fashion brand. It wasn't a sale, but a partnership that allowed New Beginning Clothing to expand to other cities while maintaining its values and essence. The condition we imposed was that the policy of hiring women in vulnerable situations, initiated by Mary Elizabeth, would be maintained and expanded. The signing of that contract, with all my children and Deborah by my side, represented the closing of a cycle, from the small living room transformed into an improvised atelier in our house, to a company that would now have a national presence. The journey had been long and extraordinary. In 2020, When the pandemic hit the world, we faced new challenges. With stores closed and uniform orders drastically reduced, we had to reinvent ourselves once again. It was Joseph Andrew who suggested the transition to online commerce, something we had resisted for years, preferring personal contact with customers. The pandemic also brought us back to our essence. We began producing masks, initially for donation to hospitals and underprivileged communities, then as a new product line. The whole family got involved. Even I, at 71, went back to sewing daily, remembering the early days when each piece I produced was crucial to put food on the table. Now, in 2025, I look back and see a life that, despite all the pain, was rich in meaning and purpose. I never remarried. There were some relationships over the years, good men who brought moments of companionship and affection, but I never felt the need to make anything official. My family, my children, Deborah, my grandchildren, and the always present memory of Celia filled my heart in a way no romance could. Arnold remains a distant, almost mythical figure in our family history. When the grandchildren grew up and began asking questions about the grandfather they never knew, we told the truth in a way appropriate for their ages, not to perpetuate resentment, but to honor the journey that brought us here. Your grandfather made mistakes that hurt many people, I would explain. But without those mistakes, our family wouldn't be what it is today. You wouldn't have so many uncles, aunts, and cousins. I wouldn't have found the strength I didn't even know I had. It's strange to think that I owe gratitude to the man who broke my heart. Not for the abandonment, of course, nor for the lies, but for the catalyst his actions became in my life. Without that birthday card found in his coat pocket, without that desperate trip to Indianapolis, without that painful confrontation, I might have lived an entire life in the shadows, accepting less than I deserved, never discovering what I was truly capable of. At 76, sitting on the porch of the house I built with my work, surrounded by photos of children and grandchildren, with Celia's memory always present in small details, I feel a peace that seemed impossible on that day in 1978. The wrinkles on my face tell the story of many smiles, many tears, many sleepless nights, many celebrations. My hands, now a little trembling with age but still skillful enough to teach my 5-year-old great-granddaughter to make her first stitches, carry the memory of each piece sewn, each fabric cut, each button sewed on. These hands fed my children, dried their tears, built a business, offered support to other broken women. If I could go back in time and talk to that young Teresa, frightened and betrayed, I would say, "The path will be difficult. There will be days when you'll want to give up, but you are stronger than you imagine. This pain, which now seems unbearable, will be transformed into something beautiful. And one day, many years in the future, you will look back and understand that that terrible moment was, in fact, the beginning of your true life." The greatest lesson I learned and try to pass on to my children, grandchildren, and now great-grandchildren is that our stories aren't defined by the blows we receive, but by how we respond to them. That sometimes we need to be broken to discover what we're made of. That from the deepest cracks can be born the brightest light. That birthday card I found in Arnold's coat pocket could have been the end of my story. Instead, it was just the first chapter of a saga of resilience, reinvention, and unconditional love. A saga that continues to unfold through the generations I helped create and inspire. And perhaps this is the most precious legacy I can leave. Not the store, not the money, not even the family name, but the certainty that it's possible to transform the greatest pain into a greater purpose. That it's possible to lose everything and still rebuild something more beautiful than what was there before. That it's possible, in the end, to transform betrayal into triumph. As I tell my grandchildren, life rarely follows the path we plan. The secret isn't resisting the unexpected turns, but learning to navigate them with grace and courage. And always remember that in the darkest moments, when everything seems lost, that's exactly when the greatest opportunities for growth and transformation are born. And you, my dear viewers watching me now, remember, no matter what your pain is, no matter what your challenge is, there is always a path forward. Sometimes we just need the courage to take the first step, even with trembling legs and a broken heart. The rest, as I discovered on that trip to Indianapolis so many years ago, the path shows us. If you liked this story, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the Grandma's Diary. It helps me a lot to continue sharing my experiences with you. Also, leave in the comments where you're watching from and if any part of my story touched your heart in a special way. Share it with someone who might be needing hope today. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to me with such kindness. May God bless each one of you.